Okay, welcome everybody to our first, maybe our only in-person event this semester. See what's going on. But thank you for grading the plate and physically coming out. So Dr. Caplan to present is myth of the rational voter. This is probably the most rational thing you're going to hear in this election cycle. So please enjoy. So briefly introduce our guest. Dr. Bryan Caplan is professor of economics here at George Mason, of course. He's one of our most well-known faculty members, without doubt. He's a New York Times best-selling author. And other than Myth of the Rational Voter, he's also written Selfish Reasons to Have More Kids and The Case Against Education. And he's also had several publications here in some major outlets, including New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal. So without further ado, Dr. Caplan.
All right, hi everybody, and thanks a lot for actually coming out in person. Welcome to those out in live stream land, but it's the people who actually show up. All right, so that's my part. So let's just start here. Behavioral economics. Everyone's heard of behavioral economics? All right, Kahneman, Tversky, Richard Thaler, a bunch of other Nobel Prize winners. All right, so since the 1970s, Tversky died. All right, so anyway, since the 1970s, it was called behavioral economics, which is a terrible phrase. All economics is about behavior, right? But anyway, that's what it's called. Better label psychology and economics that people sometimes use, has borne much fruit. Now, the key intuition of behavioral economics is this: the behavior of flesh and blood human beings, such as yourselves, is very different from the behavior of rational actors. Which you might all be perfectly rational, but other people outside this room, they're the best. Right, and this means if we want to understand the world, should we spend more time analyzing around the models? No. We should spend more time studying actual human psychology. Which sounds like a very reasonable approach, right? Who's for studying irrelevant models? Yeah. Who's for studying actual human psychology? Yes. Great. Now, here's the thing. When you think about it, incentives for voter irrationality are very frail. Why? Well, suppose you go and vote for the world to end. Okay. What's going to happen? Will the world end? Well, maybe, but not because you voted for it. Right? The world's going to end or not end. It's got nothing to do with your vote. One more person votes for the world to end. It's not going to change a goddamn thing. Right? All right? Because you're just one little person. It's all you are. You're just one little person. One grain of sand on the beach. The fact that you vote for something terrible doesn't mean it's going to happen. In fact, it does not even noticeably raise the likelihood at all. So that means that the consequences of having a crazy view on when you are voting are very small, if any. Whereas if you go to the grocery store and you buy a bunch of food that sounds good and you don't like it, the consequence of that is quite bad. Then you waste money and you get no food. Okay. So anyway, so you'd expect this behavioral approach to be especially fruitful in economics and politics. You expect this is where psychology really matters a lot, because the incentives are basically zero all the way around, as far as the concerned. Yet strangely, this behavior revolution has barely touched the economics of politics. It's barely touched it. There's way more work on psychology, economics, and finance, and labor than there ever has been on politics. Now, fortunately, there's a lot of evidence already out there. And most of it is not in economics, but it doesn't mean that evidence is not relevant. The problem is economics, like so many other fields, is not invented here complex. You know what the not invented here complex? So yeah, we didn't invent it, so it's not worthwhile. It's like, hey, I've got a great new system. Did we come up with it? No. Then I don't care. Economics has that in spades. All right. So let's just start about voter motivation. What is the voters are even trying to do? The usual view of economists, and I talked to a whole bunch, he keeps insisting this, regardless of the evidence, as far as I'm concerned, is that people vote where they are self-interest. I can't tell you how many times I've met economists, yes, of course, rich people Republican, poor people Democratic. Yeah, but is that actually true? Well, that must be. Well, let's look at the evidence. It doesn't seem to be true at all. It's barely true. Or, of course, there's, old people, they're Social Security, so they just old people really supporting boards. So, Actually, when we go and look at the numbers, it seems like almost everyone, regardless of age, thinks Social Security is great. So again, your story is saying it's something to do with high voter turnout rates for the elderly. That's really check out. Right. So almost all this evidence, most of this evidence from political scientists says the comments are wrong. They can narrow self-interest explains. So let's just go really quickly over some evidence of party identification. Higher income voters are only slightly more Republican. It's so slight you really need to take out your statistical microscope to detect it. And there's a massive flat range. So let's skip ahead to this little chart. All right, so this is from the 2004 election. All right, so take a look at that. We can see that the blue line is for Republican vote. The Republican vote share is a function of income for all voters. And the pink one is for white voters. All right, now if you take a quick look, you'll say, all right, I kind of see a slope there. All right, but then pay a little bit more attention to the categories. If you look at categories, how many Americans back in 2004 were in that less than 15%, 15K category? So 8%. And how many were in that over 200K category back in 2004? Like 2%. So when you take out those endpoints, then there's hardly any slope at all, right? And especially if you just look at white voters, you'll see that there's actually a totally flat range from 30,000 all the way up to 150,000, which is where almost all people are. So there's a bit more slope for the darker line. That's the one where it's like, oh, for the white line, though, you see very slope. And again, really what's going on is that non-whites are more democratic regardless of income, and especially in 2004, they were more likely to vote. Age share of the U.S. is risk over time, so it's a larger economic share than higher income. Okay, that is just one example. You see this in a wide range of data. And then you can go and take a look at specific issues. Right? For specific issues, you can see a self-interest little effect, or even the wrong effect, which just goes in the opposite of the expected direction. Right? On views about Social Security. Right? So self-interest says that what kind of people think Social Security is awesome and we should have more of it? People who, according to narrow self-interest, want more money spent on the elderly. The elderly, of course. Look at the data and we see barely, basically no age pattern at all, or anything. Young people might even be a little bit more supportive. Right, same thing for Medicare. All right, abortion, this is a fun one. All right, so who actually generally is stuck raising a unplanned child? Is it a man or woman usually gets stuck raising an unplanned child?
Woman.
Women. When this happens, how much support do they usually get from father? Not much. All right, so usual self-interest story would say that which gender would be strongly pro-choice?
Women.
Women. All right, take a look at the data. Wrong, wrong, wrong. Actually, it is men who are a little bit more pro-choice than women. All right. Yeah, there's actually a bumper sticker I've seen that says men who get pregnant, abortion would be a sacrament. Based upon an incorrect reading of the data. And you say, what in the world's really going on? Well, this is the real story. Women are more religious than men. Religious people don't want abortion. There you go. That's the correct story. Okay. Yeah, I have actually heard some bizarre theories like, well, men are hoping that abortion is legal and women will be more promiscuous, and then it all works out. Come on. That's the real story. You're only saying that because the numbers didn't work, right? Right. And then plus healthcare in general. So then if you want to make are there any cases where self-interest does work well? And there are, but they're not in the place where it is expected to find them. So smoking. Yes. Opinions about the limitations on smoking are very well predicted by how 90% of people who have never smoked said they want more restrictions. And about 60% of petty smokers say that they want fewer restrictions. Right? Actually, no, just don't want more restrictions. Even then, of course, 40% of smokers are saying they do want more restrictions on smoking, so it's like that. But this is one of the better cases where we can actually see the people that are smoking more are in fact having those restrictions smoking. And then there's another very funny one. All right, so the draft, conscription. Okay, so the whole idea of conscription, of course, is that you get cheap soldiers, right? Because if you have a choice of being in the military has to entice you with money and stuff and free tuition and so on, right? You at some point receive some advertising from the military trying to get you to join up, right? And they offer you stuff, right? Whereas under conscription, guess what they offer you? Yeah, it's like hey, guess what? Yeah, you have the privilege to serve the country, and 3 squares a day, and probably won't go to a place where you get shot at. How's that? Well, I don't really care because you have to do it like you're not. All right, anyway, so under conscription, then taxpayers save money. So, and since women historically have never been conscripted in the US, so which gender do you think would be rah conscription?
Women.
Women? Is this true? No, it's not. In fact, men are more pro-conscription than women. The one interesting fly in the ointment is that if you go and ask them by age, you go and ask 18-year-olds, should we conscript for 18 or 19-year-olds? 18-year-olds say conscript for 19-year-olds first. If you go and ask the 19-year-olds who should we conscript first, they say the 18-year-olds. So there's a slight self-interest in the fact that years, but basically. And when you take a look at a parent that is self-interest, from demographics, usually affects privilege instead. So you go and see that life's more democratic. So you say, oh, that makes sense because Democrats are going to do more than before, much more than before. It's not the right story. How do we know? Because rich blacks are also much more democratic. And the same in reverse holds for whites, for Republican. So, and more so than ever, actually, now. So, again, the story does not actually fit. So that's motivation. Right? At this point, there's a lot of political scientists who say, okay, great. So we have all these worries that economists have filled our heads with about people just being greedy jerks as they vote. And now it turns out that people are just trying to do whatever's best for society, something which is important. So we all relax and enjoy democracy. However, there's a little problem. It only helps you, or it primarily helps you, to have a well-motivated person if they know what they're doing. So yes, it's nice to have a doctor who cares, but what if the doctor thinks that bleeding is the best cure for all ailments? You want to go to that doctor? Yeah. It's like, he's so nice. He's so nice. Yes, but he believes in bleeding. I don't want to go to a doctor. I don't care how nice they are, they believe in bleeding. They've got to have reasonable beliefs about how to help before I'm very interested in their desire to help. Yeah. In economics, we have something called the rationalistic assumption. And on this assumption, anytime there's a pattern of errors in people's beliefs, they get called irrational automatically. And this kind of rationality is very easy to detect in voters. It's very plausible in theory, and it's very easy to detect in practice. Why is it so plausible? It's so easy to believe that voters would be highly irrational. Because the personal costs of having idiotic views about politics are useless. And like I said, you could go and vote for the world to end, and vote for bleeding, vote for anything you want. And what happens to you in any large election? The same thing that was going to happen to you anyway. That's what happens. And we have this long-running debate with Pete Becky. Anyway, so Pete says, yeah, Bryan, what you're telling me is we get the policies we deserve. I said, yeah, unfortunately, we get the policies they deserve. You and me, we and Pete, get the policies that the American public deserves. Not so good. Point being that you can go and learn everything you want, everything there is to know about policy and what policies you live under. Same ones as everybody else. Don't want for you. Now, one very nice example of this, or like illustration of this, is betting. So, what is betting? Betting temporarily raises the price of being an idiot. And of course, there are many smart idiots, right? So, even my dad, who's a PhD engineer, he's a very smart guy. I get him on any political topic, and he will say things that would embarrass me if I agreed with his conclusion. They're so emotional, so ill-grounded, so dogmatic, so motivated, obviously, by anger and resentment. Good guy for it. But get him on politics and he'll say things that are so far below his intellectual ability because he's not even trying. He's giving in, surrendering to emotion. But offer my dad a bet, and like almost anybody else in the world, his whole attitude changes. I remember back in 2008, there's a famous pundit saying, Hillary Clinton is going to win the presidency for sure. There's just no way anything else can happen. If you're really so sure, how do you give me 10 to 1 odds? About 100,000. And guess what? You try making people bets of this kind. What do? Do they go and bet on what they just said before the bet arose? No, like, oh, wow, no, how many dollars? You said you were sure. I'm not sure. I'm not omniscient like you are. So why don't you go and take my money? If it were bet on whether 1 plus 1 is 2, you would go bet me on that. Right? If I said it wasn't. You really have so much incredible insight in the future. The crystal ball works so well. So I have a long history of making public bets with people on political questions, questions of social science questions. And I'm going to brag. I have 21 bets that come to fruition, and I've won all 21 bets. These are public bets. So now, what I can say is that, first of all, getting anyone to bet on anything is like pulling teeth. People hate to bet. Why? Because it deprives them of their ability to pretend like they're not wrong. As long as people are just shooting their mouths off, there's a substantial chance of a Republican coup in November. What the hell is that? Is that 80%, 30%, 2%? What? What does it mean? Well, as long as you're talking in ordinary conversation, you make a bunch of big, dramatic claims, and if it doesn't come to pass, just say, all right, but once you make a bet, then it is specific. Right? And once it becomes specific, you can demonstrate that you're wrong, and people really hate that, especially if they have some reputation in the publicly where they actually strongly confirm being correct, undeniably, because they bought into the terms of the bet. By the way, some of you make fun of me, like, oh, you're an economist, you got a good job, you bet people $50, what does that show? I say, do you know how hard it is to get people to bet at $1? It's really hard. Getting people to give you odds, even when they claim to know exactly what's going to happen, very hard. So these bets that I made, each one is hard fought to get someone to sign on. And of course, once someone loses, then they often say, that's well. Does one bet prove the certainty? Of course not. But the fact that you do not have any track record at all of winning bets shows something, shows that you don't really know much about it. Of course, there are plenty of people who have interesting things to say, but they're just not good at saying what will happen. Wouldn't it be great if we would just accept the interesting person who read a lot of books? But when it comes to accurately saying what will occur, you're no good. So stop. Which then reduces the noise and allows people who actually have a track record of success to get more attention. Anyway, so betting rate temporarily raises the price of political rationality, and just as my story predicts, you'll see suddenly people are much more moderate, much more reasonable, or often just like when they turn on the brain and realize, wait a second, I'm shooting my mouth off, and now if I actually stick to my guns, I'm going to be poor and humiliated. So I guess I'm going to have to go. So that's why voter rationality is plausible theory. And I also say that voter rationality is easy to get to hear. So in my book, The Rational Voter, I spent a lot of time going over differences in beliefs between people who really know a subject and people who are not studying the subject, and on economics, but also on other subjects. Anyway, so in this book, I focus on 4 big areas of where economists and the public disagree. Of course, you can always say that the experts are wrong, the public's right. In the book, I go and try to address those arguments. Good job. Anyway, so 4 big differences between economists and the public. The public is much more anti-market than the public. The public has much more pessimistic views about the social impacts of markets. And the way I like to put it is this. Plenty of economists will say that markets fail in certain situations. But the whole argument comes down to, can someone make money solving a problem? And if they can, then economists will almost always say, then the market will work. Economists that are focused on, can you make money solving a problem? Non-economists, on the other hand, are like, hey, they're making money solving a problem, get them, stop! It's terrible. Big difference. Then you have anti-forwards, so economists or non-economists are much more pessimistic about the economic effects of international borders, protectionism, immigration restrictions, and other instances. Right? There is this paperwork bias. A lot of economists tend to think about we can measure economic success by employment alone. When unemployment is high, you can understand, but again, if you realize, well, if we try just to prevent people from never losing their jobs, we'd be stuck back in the 19th or 18th centuries, the late Stone Age. Someone comes with a tractor and the farmers at work. And the real measure of economic success is production, not employment. And then you see general essence. I said that these are only the beginning. Okay, so there's actually two versions of the same slide. Okay. Only the beginning. So the concept in psychology that I most want economists especially to learn, which they very rarely know about, is what's called social desirability bias. Social desirability bias. This is a fancy phrase for something that we're all familiar with, namely, when the truth sounds bad, people lie. And sometimes they lie so much, you hear so many lies, they actually start believing. Really simple example is, am I fat? Well, there's only one socially acceptable answer to that question, right? You don't say, oh yeah, totally, fat as a pig. Yeah, that is not a socially acceptable answer to that question. It's, oh no, you're right, so that's just one example, but the list goes on unto infinity. Did you go to church last weekend? Well, there's what people say, and then there's what we actually do. People lie about going to church because it sounds good. Right? People lie about voting because it's considered socially desirable. Or there are many things like, can you put a price on human life? Can you put a price on human life? What we all do, in fact, all of you put a price on your life right today. You said, hey, I can either stay home in my bunker, not catching any kind of contagious disease, or I can come here and take a small risk. And I consider the pleasure of listening to Bryan in person to be worth that small risk. I will put a price on your own life. That's not hardly a hard one. It's a small chance to die. More likely to get killed if you're driving a car than you're It is not socially desirable to say you can put a price on your life, and yet we all do it. Right? Here's another phenomenon. Nothing's more important than education. Here this one for years. It turns out there is something more important than education. A very slight risk of future getting sick is more important than education. Right? So when you take a look, once you understand this constant social desirability bias, and you listen to what politicians literally say, you realize they are saying things that are obviously false almost all the time. Just go sentence by sentence through what politicians say, that's literally true. How often is it literally true? You know about the PolitiFact, when they fact check politicians, they say pants on fire 30% of the time. I'll say politicians with pants on fire 95% of the time. When you actually take a stubbornly literal view of what he said, that nothing's more important than education, but he actually favors keeping schools closed. Therefore, he doesn't do that. Therefore, he was trying to, at best, contradict himself. He shared it, he said. Talking out both sides of his mouth. Sure, it's why why politicians say this nonsense? To be liked, to be popular. People don't like people who speak black truths. They like people who give people advice. So in general, we take a look at what people say, what happens in politics. The ability of social desirability bias to predict what will actually pass, very high. All right. So now, moving on. So basic behavioral public choice. You guys all know about public choice, economics and politics, maybe part of the name brand of George Mason. To explain a lot of innovation policy just by taking the story of hope. Voters that are unselfish but irrational, well-meaning but crazy. Those people. And then imagine what happens when people vote, when politicians vote in order to bring their yeah, you're going for a room and you're going to tell people what they want to hear, right? So what do the unselfish but crazy people want to hear? A bunch of well-meaning nonsense. All right, that's what you're going to get. All right, yeah. So you've heard of the median voter rolls. This is a very simple model, which comes down to popular policies and the way because politicians want to be popular. So if you want to be popular, tell people you're going to do what people want done. All right, so anyway, so here's the other thing. You got rational selfish voters. then the status quo always benefits somebody. If people are greedy but calculating people. So you guys know Breaking Bad, Walter White. An evil jerk, but super smart, clever, shrewd. Right? When Walter plans things out, he is actually generally managing to get himself. Most of the cases. But still, you watch that show and say, hey, Walt's so smart, he's evil, but he knows how to get things done. Anyway, so in a world where you've got rational voters, status quo always benefits someone. And furthermore, even better, in a world of rational voters, we're always playing less many people. We're always playing less many people. No one is ever there saying, this is not negotiable, we can never possibly discuss changing in on this. In a world of rational voters, someone says, hey, can we bargain on this? They'll say, can we bargain to make abortion illegal? Sure. Cost $2 trillion, but yeah, let's go for it. I'm sure you're not 900%. Just imagine politics going like that. That is nothing remotely like what goes on in Washington. So then, they will bargain on things that do not have great symbolic value. They'll bargain on things that where people are too boring to actually get people riled up over. But for anything important, anything that gets to people's hearts and guts, then people just want to fight. Even if they know the fighting is going to go nowhere, do it just to do it. There is a very popular story going around my colleagues where they're playing special interests with bad policies. And I say this, look, that is a story, it's not always wrong, but generally the status quo is actually popular. When we look at public opinion, we usually see the status quo is actually popular. So, for example, it's very common for economists to say, well, the reason why we have all these tariffs and trade barriers is just because of special interests, the steel industry shoving it down the throats of the American people. It's not true. All right, so we actually go and ask the voters who have been very protectionist. It was probably a big part of Trump's appeal in 2016 is very vocal protectionist. So when people heard it, people say, hey, he's just going to go and try to go and rip off the American people and go and help a few big businesses. No, it's like, hey, he's trying to stand for America. Great. Then, how about farm subsidies? Farm subsidies again. So, I say, well, her name is a farmer, so obviously farmers who is forcing this on the House Republic. Wrong. About 80% of Americans support farm subsidies. Why? Well, you would ask them, they'll say things like, so we have enough food. I want there to be food. I'm going to be food without farm subsidies. You can say, well, not only will 20 costs you get the subsidies, everything's in the store. As of 2019 anyway, there was over a few months ago a bunch of things were in the store. Did any of you guys set out to go and do the shopping while you have your family? All right. Or like the chart bailouts. So this was back in 2008, troubled asset relief program. By the standards of the time, it was an enormous bailout, and not compared to the coronavirus bailouts. Seemed popular, but only 25%. The real objection was we should bail out even more. So there are some persistent public policies, immigration. So until 2019, Trump had gotten immigration down a bit, nothing like what he said. He definitely hadn't managed to kick out all illegal immigrants or anything like that. Foreign aid also generally quite popular. I think the challenge is this: just the main existing policy that the median voter opposes. So I put an intended a few days ago to say, I don't think the median voter favors the Northern Virginia school closing. But there's really a data saying like most people actually want, look if anything, to strict the policy. So maybe you just ask parents. Now again, this is a case where there's a big difference between what people will actually do when they go out versus what they would say vote for. So you notice most private schools in this area are people are not going to pay $20,000, $30,000 for Zoom school. Public schools, on the other hand, you say, hey, we can get hurt. You get sick, you get it. Well, good. How likely is it? Well, that doesn't sound very good. Now, here's a little bit of advanced legal choice, available cascades. So there is a general result psychology that says that people often estimate probabilities based on how easy it is to think of examples. Like, what are the odds the next person who comes to this room will be Albanian? Well, you think of any idea of how many Albanians can be in? N for Kosha, Mrs. Kosha. dog. That's it. I'm going to get my opinions. All right, so anyway, since it's hard to think of examples, people tend to think there's a low probability of not being. And you know, and guess what? There is a low probability of not being the next person down the road. Sometimes then this is a reasonable approach. Called the little risky, right? But this approach often leads to systematically biased estimates. What happens is called probability bias. Right? And again, when you get these biases, when there are very rare events that are extremely dramatic, that blow people away, that make them angry, that fill them with rage, misery, hate, fear, things that pull on people's heartstrings, could be ultra rare. And yet you can still have a national uproar. Does this remind you of anything? And again, how often on the news when there is such an event is there someone saying, I'll suggest that right, it's national area is good, now we're I don't know why we don't know anything about this. But that person is correct. That person is correct. Now normally people demonstrate this bias in simple experiments. How does it play out in the real world? Well, there's economist Timur Grant and well-known guy Sunstein, who's also Obama's regulatory czar, and they came with a fascinating answer. The answer says there's an interaction between availability bias and the media that leads to a never-ending series of mass hysterias, which they call probability cascades. So mass hysterias, mass hysteria. Suddenly, people couldn't care less about a problem, now say it's the most important thing in the universe based upon a story, which proved it is wrong, right? We all agree that one story that proves it is wrong, because there are about 8 billion people on Earth. So you can find a story to prove anything, you don't prove anything at all. All right, so here is the cycle of hysteria according to Grant Sunstein. First of all, there are shocking but rare events happening. Shocking but rare events. So it's shocking but rare events. Okay. Then what does the media do? Do they say, everyone calm down, this is just a shocking but rare event, no reason to get upset about it. No reason to really even put it on the news. I don't know why we're talking about it. Is that what the media says? No. It's shocking and rare event all the time, 24 hours a day, until people lose their minds. That is how the media works. So strangely, my wife never watched the news. Almost 30 years of marriage, and then 8 months ago she started. That's crazy, actually. It's very smart. Still, it's hard to watch this stuff and not start acting like this is important. Like you said, this proves nothing, it's not important. Anyway, so media is massive coverage of shocking rare events in order to get good ratings. Because people eat this stuff up. People don't want to watch statistics. They want to watch blood and gore and horror. They want to have a story about 1,000 people. No, one story about one person. Old quote attributed to Stalin. One death is a tragedy, a million deaths is statistics, and which one do you want to go and suck people in with? One person. That's genius if you just want to brainwash people. All right, so then the public watches, and the more you watch the stuff, the easier it becomes to start thinking of examples of these rare shocking events. In fact, if you watch enough, it's hard to think of anything else except examples of these rare events. So there's only a week that there were people talking about, oh, there's problems with chemical plants in Lebanon. Oh my God, what's going on in Lebanon? People who never heard about Lebanon in their life before could have heard on that. Then a week that you're like, oh my God, I saw these pictures. There's a person there who lost his son. Oh my God. And then 2 weeks later, totally forgotten. Anyway, one of it is the public begins to think these problems are quantitatively serious. It's hard to watch this stuff without going and thinking that it's telling you something about the world, whereas it's really just telling you something about entertainment. What is entertainment? You guys are going to young university to show about 24. There's a counterterrorism show. So every episode of the show, the United States was about to disappear the threat of terrorism. 8 seasons that went on, Jack Bauer keeps saving the day and barely got his skin of his teeth. Right? It's hard to watch, so even it's obviously fiction without saying, oh my God, there are important lessons here. Yeah, but this show is absurd. How can it be that the show goes on for hundreds of episodes and he saves the world by the skin of his teeth hundreds of times? He's going to fail eventually, right? You know, eventually you juggle with chainsaws and like you're going to lose your hand if you fail 1% of all crimes, but somehow Jack Allen. All right, and then of course another thing. Once politicians go and find a society that's been whipped into hysteria based upon shocking but rare events, then what are the politicians that are going to say? My fellow Americans, we need to calm down and face facts. These stories prove that we swat. It's not what a winning politician is going to say. Instead, a winning politician is going to appeal to emotion and say, we got to do something. Those guys is falling. It's terrible. So, just an example of nuclear power. Right, so there have been some very well publicized nuclear accidents. There's no Western country that led to any noticeable number of deaths. Not even close. On the other hand, standard technologies we've been using for centuries, like coal, kill a whole lot of people, both in coal mining and also in particulate pollution. So almost everyone who knows the science will tell you the technology will say nuclear power is fantastic. Wait for it. But one story about a nuclear meltdown. Any actual nuclear plant, the world loses its mind. Right, so the Kagoshima one in Japan, I believe last time I checked, 0 human beings died. And yet, in response, Germany shut down all those plants. Why? Because it sounds good, and getting people picked up in the state area to do something. What do politicians do? They say, no, actually, the science of the nuclear energy is very good, it's very green, it's very cost efficient, much less actual pollution, hardly anyone dies. You know, totally go ahead, nuclear power now. Yes. Right. Atomic energy. Right? But that is not a winning strategy for plus, right? Terrorism, another ludicrous one. Right? So you go and look at the numbers, murder is less than 1% of all deaths, terrorism is less than 1% of all murders, and yet we have spent trillions of dollars fighting terrorism. There are a few people saying, well, some companies spend the trillions and we don't have a lot of terrorism. Really? You know how easy it would be for a Middle Eastern terrorist to sneak into the US via Mexico? How far can it possibly? Like, so there's plenty of people to get in, you can smuggle for a few $1,000. It's not going to be that money in Mexico, they can totally do it. But so the fact that it hasn't happened shows very few people actually have the discipline and desire to go through quite simple things. So why is democracy worse? People often wonder, why is policy so bad? Why is policy so bad? Once you start thinking about politics in this way, my approach, makes us ask, why isn't policy much worse than it is? Like, why isn't the world just on fire? People's voting is such a terrible way of reacting to information, terrible decisions, and I got a few answers for you. Answer number 1. Many voters are more educated than the median citizen, and the more educated are less rational. So I'll say this is what you see in the data. While more educated voters are still bad, but they're not as bad as regular voters. So thank goodness everybody gets to vote. So that's one story. Answer number 2. Politicians are much more responsive to lead opinion, and elites are less irrational. So there's a book by a principal political scientist named Bryan Caplan called Athletes and Influence. And in this book, he puts a lot of time in documenting that politicians in particular pay very little attention to these politics, especially in theory. All right? And he's really upset about this, and he's terrible. And when I read the book, I said, well, why are you so upset? Maybe this is why things are actually much better than they would be if we listened to everything. And especially when you look at the typical views among non-elites, I'm a bit surprised that he isn't happy about it. So, for example, anti-gay views are much more common among non-elites. So you think a Princeton professor would be saying that? Well, he actually he was a big enough believer in democracy to kind of answer number 3. One says voters reward politicians for both policies and results. So politicians deliberately water down voters' worst ideas. So if it sounds good to just shut down the entire society in every way, politicians might realize, wait a second, we do that, and where do we get through? All right, so I guess we better not really shut everything down. All And then, an intriguing implication of this is that voters are just going to dislike politicians because they're either going to seem dishonest or not. So, if politicians are consistently trying to water down voters' worst ideas, then voters will either say, hey, he's watered down my idea, he's corrupt, he doesn't listen to people. Or maybe a politician listens and then it's a disaster, and then politicians say, wow, that guy's a loser. Fourth answer. Voters use what we call in-app monitoring strategies. What this means is that voters let politicians get away with not doing what they promised. So if a politician promises to do X, and he doesn't do X, you might think the voters would be extremely angry and say, well, that will vote for you. In the real world, though, the punishment for obviously lying is quite small. Right. Similarly, when policies that voters want to have, politicians will often say, my hands were tied, I couldn't do anything. Maybe proven to be false, but if you want to give politicians good incentives to take the my hands were tied excuse, most people aren't going to work very hard for you if you just buy that. So he said, look, figuring it out is your job. Don't tell me the hands are tied. I elected you to get it done, or you're fired. So last week in Texas, I had a really rich guy, and he just says, I want something, and then he has people work for him and they do it. So I want the biggest flag in Texas, right here, right now, as soon as possible. And 2 weeks later, it's there. How would that, and what would happen if the people working for him just said, it just can't be done? Maybe once you say, oh, maybe not. But the people that work for him need to be able to say, I get the job done. I don't make excuses. I make your dreams happen. Sir. So how voters could, for example, the same thing with politicians, where the measure on job block, and if they don't look good, they're happy. And so now this only would explain why things are better than they would like to be. Politicians actually try to fix things. So maybe that. For example, you might think maybe government economists are the real special interest in the good, for instance, where some of the people think it's a good idea. All right. Now, closing thoughts. So since you actually are in the Econ Club, I wouldn't be surprised if many of you are thinking about a career in economics. Thinking about a career in economics. Nice. Few people here. All right. So anyway, what I'm telling you is really good news for you, because what I'm telling you is really a full employment act for another generation of researchers. If you are a young researcher, you don't want to hear all problems have been solved and you know it. That means there's nothing for you to do. What you want to hear is that we don't have answers, but there are promising approaches that we can pursue. And that is precisely what I'm telling you. Follow this approach, and you will be able to make great progress, because so much of the work that has come forward is so reasonable. You can make the world of human knowledge lighter through your eyes. Thanks a lot, and a few questions. All right, questions, anything in mind? It's a chance to talk to a human, don't forget that. Dash, question?
Yeah.
Please speak extra loud, so I and people out of the line.
Sure. So I don't know if it's second or third slide. In one of the slides, you alluded to the bias.
Let's see. This one?
I think it's
After?
right.
Availability or?
Yeah.
Availability, okay, great.
Right. So do you think voters are, the information channels that they're using to get information are confirming those biases?
Oh yeah. Yeah, of course. When people watch things to be told they're wrong, no, they watch things to be told they're right. So that's it. I remember talking to my dad, and I showed him books. I wouldn't agree with that. You bought a reading book you don't already agree with, see my website? No. And my dad is a very honest man. For example, most people subscribe to magazines because they agree with viewpoint. They go to websites where they agree with viewpoint. So yeah, of course, there's a tendency to confirm. Now, of course, there's a lot of people who just aren't all that particular, and so we'll just watch the mainstream news, and then whatever says, then I go along with this. It's within a wide range. So yeah, people tend to go and watch what makes sense to themselves. Well, here's watch Fox News. Democrats watch MSNBC. Surprise, surprise. James, your question?
Oh, yeah. Democracy more destructive than like some countries opposed to others. There are some countries that manage it a lot better.
Yeah, I think so. Very good question. So, what we normally say is like some democracies were better than others. Right now, how much of that is that the voters are better or just less crazy in some countries than others? And how much of it is that the people are managed better? It's hard to say. So I have done a whole paper on Singapore. I looked at public opinion in Singapore, and by most accounts, policy in Singapore is extremely high quality. But when I looked at public opinion, the public didn't see it was notably reasonable compared to other countries. So the usual story there is just that the elites in the rule of law in Singapore are just much more accountable than most other countries. Imagine, when it's a single dictatorship, like no, it's not. They have their free elections. It's just the same party you've been waiting for 60 years. That's also true in much of the cities. So Singapore, see other ones, of course. Normally, the U.S. looks pretty good compared to other democracies. Switzerland, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, UK, normally counted as being better than others. That's reasonable.
I have a question about, so when you mentioned
Oh,
when you mentioned the elites, right? So would you consider the system that the United States does democracy in, the Electoral College, like, do you consider that a good system because the elites are at the end of the day the ones that choose, or do you think that another kind of elite is needed?
I'd say the original design was sensible, where it was actually checking democracy early on. However, like in the modern world, the electors in the college almost always just vote for whoever it is they're supposed to. There's a very tiny handful of what are called faithless electors, who are actually the only ones that are notably doing the job that the Constitution gave them, of saying, hey, I think you guys made a terrible choice, so I'm not going to go along with it. So, in terms of whether the Electoral College is better than the popular vote, I don't have any strong opinion on this. Again, people often look at it and say, hey, if we did it by popular vote, the better side would have won. The important thing to remember is, if the election were based on popular vote, different politicians would have been running. They would have campaigned different ways. So it doesn't make sense to say let's imagine changing only the voting rule without changing anything else, because that's not the way it works. So, for example, if you have a popular vote, then politicians would no longer care so much about swing states. Right now, politicians want to put almost all the way in swing states. Under popular vote, that would no longer make sense. Right now, there's no reason for Republicans to ever go to California to raise money from disgruntled California Republicans. Why under popular vote, Republicans would want to go to California because you get another million votes from Republicans in California, great. So, other questions? Anything whatsoever on the lines? Yeah, James.
I know in public choice, like they're very big on constitutions as being like barrier to like democracy wreaking havoc. Do you agree with that by and large?
Once in a while. The main thing is that constitutions don't enforce themselves, so there's a lot of countries that have veto written constitution and people for, and then other countries don't have any written constitution, and yet people still have some sense there's some things that suit the cricket, like in the UK, and then they don't do them. For example, in the UK right now, as far as I understand, there's absolutely nothing in the law that would prevent the current parliament from voting to give themselves rule for all children. Right? They have a majority, they vote as a bloc, so all they do is they just vote to say that the Conservative Party rules for eternity in the UK, and they have a majority, so according to the letter of law, they do it. But everybody knows it's not going to happen because that just isn't cricket. It's not the way that English players run England. And there's other countries where it says in very fine print, you may never do this, and you have to do it anyway. So in the US, the cases where it seems most likely the Constitution actually matters are the things like the First Amendment. So those are cases where there are some obviously unpopular policies like giving religious freedom safeness that have justices will enforce. So there's a bit of that. On the other hand, as you may have heard, in the 1930s, there was a big change in the Supreme Court on economic policies. Did the Constitution change? Was there any amendment that legalized nudity? No. But there was a new Supreme Court Justice, Supreme Court Justice in Iraq, he wasn't there. actually old one, just said, you know what? I decided the Constitution means something different from what I've been saying for the last 10 years. And once he switches out, then the other four that we voted with gave up, and that's what. So overall, I'd say the Constitution is really overrated. But the main constitutions that really make a difference are ones where some hostile power just forces it down your throat. And if you're lucky, they give you something better than you ever would have for yourself. Most notably, the Constitution of Japan. Right, so you know what Japan was like in 1945. This is one of the militaristic societies in history. Right? And what did the United States give them? A constitution that said they could not have a military at all. Right? So the Japanese would never have voted for that, not in a million years. But well, of course, now they might vote for it because they got used to it. Anyway, the U.S. forced it down the throats, right down point, really down point, nuclear weapon point, and it stuck. Right? So about 5 years ago, Japan did vote to say, well, we're not going to have a military, we're going to have kind of like a little defense force here. And maybe in 100 years, we'll be back to having a military. It's going to take a long time. By the way, what are all the awful things that happen in Japan because they don't have a military to defend themselves? What are all the horrible things that happened since World War II? Peace and prosperity, the horrible things that befell Japan because their military was disbanded. Other question? Yeah. Josh?
With Japan, they had the lost ticket.
They had
The lost ticket. The lost ticket where the GDP went down.
the last decade, yes.
Yeah.
Again, you're talking about the last decade because they're spoiled. Not as good as yet. Yeah, they've not been without problems, but if you look at Japan in 1945 and look at it during the horrible lost decade, what are you talking about? No bodies anywhere. Nobody, this is like people have food. This is great. So, push back. Of course, I don't know. Well, their housing policy in the U.S. is built all that stuff. Yes, please.
Yeah, so I have two questions. The first question is, I don't know if you've read this, but like a popular paper by Andrew Gelman and someone else, the 1 in 10 million odds.
Yes.
Do you know, have an updated estimate for this election? And then my second question is, can you talk about how the elites act as a check or have failed to act as a check in the foreign policy establishment, not just scholars, but think tank people and how they influence the war in Iraq, blah blah blah.
Sure. So, the government and co-author paper. So there are some ways of estimating how your odds of being cast a decisive vote would put it in. The odds 1 in 10 to negative 100, something like that. 1 in 10 to 100. 1 in Google. You guys know what Google went to number before? So 10 to 100. All right. So they came up with a much higher estimate of 1 in 10 million. Although even they would say, well, it really hinges upon whether you're swing state or not. So if you're not in swing state, then your odds really are, and you still have and on the other hand, if you're in a swing state, then your odds are maybe 1 in 10. So, although that too depends upon whether the election is close or not. So if the election is not close, then your odds of casting decisive vote go down. I don't know that anyone has really done better since then. Again, of course, there's the 1 sentence version of paper that's really 1 in 10 million, which is a gross oversimplification for most people. Virginia is now a pretty blue state, so yeah, the odds that any Virginia resident is going to take the presidential election is basically 1 or 2. So they're overwhelmingly likely to be Democratic. Now, let's see, for your other question from Bryan Caplan.
Oh, just you said the elites and how they act as a check, and you talk about foreign policy.
Right. So, foreign policy. So, the general elite view on foreign policy comes down to this, which is that you should be more involved in world affairs, but they're less inclined to actual war, and they're definitely not inclined to the law and just let God sort it out. Which is a popular point of view, actually. And I remember in September of 2001 saying, are we just going to leave the country? Because there were a lot of people that would have been ready to push the button on September 12th. You might say, they didn't even know which country did it on September 12th. Yeah, there were people ready to do it, but they didn't even know what country. But that is how angry people were about that day. Most of you is actually anyone here actually born before September terms of what elites have managed to do, so, that's a good question. So I would say that probably the main things they've done are, there have been a larger number of interventions because of elites. On the other hand, there have been fewer, there's been more moderate use of extreme force in those cases. So, I mean, probably, so like, at least in a way, probably we're not in the right world. So, but I can't work on it anyway. So that one is too popular. Other questions? Yes, Alex.
Well, I'm kind of curious. How do you think the median voter views automation? What that is and that kind of thing?
Yeah, so I kind of see very recent numbers, but the general view is a lot of people are very good with automation. Destroying jobs, definitely in the short run, and even in the long run, there's a lot of skepticism about automation going and striking the human condition. Never mind, we've had centuries of automation, and yet, as of 2019, the unemployment rate is below 4%. So, probably the real story is the median voters worry about automation. I don't think they actually want government to go and really crush it just for regulators. It's getting out of hand. Right now, of course, trying to get that amounts to basically sort of break up progress, which is better than no progress. But on the other hand, that's it. I mean, one example of this is high definition television. You guys remember there used to be something called standard definition television. Ever heard of this? And what the US regulation did is they required broadcasters to continue broadcasting standard definition for about 5 extra years past the point when it's profitable. Right? So again, usual economic stories, it's hard to get people to switch over to new technology. But the actual story was government was subsidizing the old technology for much years and used regulations to keep it afloat. So yeah, I think it's great progress. Now standard definition television still in secure, so yeah, it's still work out. It's slower than everything. Again, obviously for things like driverless cars, the amazing they're not a big double standard. A driverless car kills someone, then it shows the whole product is effective. Whereas people get killed by regular cars with drivers every day, that doesn't show those are effective. Again, it's the dramatic stories drive policy. They drive public discussion, they drive policy, and
Do you see this as, in a sense, like a curse, like it's always going to be this way, or is there like in 50, 100, 200, 500 years, that humans evolved not to be so availability biased, or do you think it's just the way it's going to be?
so in terms of Darwinian evolution, I don't see any sign of people that really use as the word of God or dying off. So the evolution will say this. Will human beings just learn to be better? There's a long run tendency in that direction, so it's plausible. Right? Of course, you might say, what is most of the progress really just in technology and economics in terms of the actual human character? You know, like, there are a bunch of ways that human beings are just less brutal and vicious than they were 100 years ago. So, there's some hope in this very long run. And of course, the fact there are a bunch of countries means that there are some countries that can do well in the world. So, so, 100 years in the future, there's some optimistic over that time horizon. There's no way I can make that on that. So, that's all we're way back, and then first of all, and then my head. Way back.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Professor. So what's your take on conversational paradox? There's some treatment.
Yeah, so conversational paradox, not to go into details, but so mathematically speaking, it's possible you can have a bunch of different options in politics, and each one can lose to another one. It'll compare that on the context majority rule, and yet it can actually turn out that no one policy actually can go and use all the policies. So anyway, what I say is that's theoretically interesting. I don't see that as being of any importance in the real world. So in the real world, the reason why we have spent $1 trillion on terrorism and totally insignificant risk, it's not conversational paradox. It's because people very strongly want to do something about it. They're emotional, it's a very dramatic story. So, basically there's some very mathematically challenging puzzles in voting. And in my view, none of those are actually any real importance. Again, what really matters is bad stuff is popular. So that's my honest view. I know there's a bunch of people who spend their lives working on that, who would be disinclined to agree. I'll see you then.
You mentioned that the status quo is broadly speaking popular to the average voter. What does it take then for the average voter to say, yeah, let's go ahead and start a revolution? Because clearly, revolution doesn't happen.
So of course, normally revolutions don't happen because a bunch of people want to happen. Usually there is a state of social disarray, and then a small group of fanatics says, yeah, finally an opportunity to seize control. So I say, and then once they get control and they say, people are with us, and any people who aren't with us, they're dead. So that's the way I'd say is the main pattern. The Bolsheviks in the Russian Revolution, they had one democratic election after the revolution, and they were very soundly defeated by a party who probably never heard of, the Social Revolutionaries. The Bolsheviks had a very organized group of violent fanatics, and anyone found their way, they killed, and they worked well together, and they seized power, and then they spoke to people for 7 years after that. And the people that tried saying otherwise ended up dead in Siberia. So, I'd say in general revolutions, the idea that they're popular is not right, especially the violent ones. The fact that violent usually shows there's like people on the other side who really don't want this to happen. I'd say what the closest things to popular revolutions would be class boundaries in Eastern Europe. There's really not much way of revolutions. There's really just people in charge, lost the will to kill to maintain power. And once people sense that weakness, then they'll spiral down into a almost entirely peaceful power. Good question.
Last question.
Oh, yeah, this is going to follow, sure.
So then what about the American Revolution?
Yeah.
Of course, at the start, people were fully and for independence. But then we didn't also institute one party rule after.
Right. Well, so there were very serious violent reprisals against loyalists. So a lot of people in Canada descended from those people. So there's a considerable debate among historians of the American Revolution how popular was it really. It'd be amazing if there weren't a good third of people who thought it was terrifying. And then again, of course, a whole lot of just neutral apathetic. Just hope they don't die. So yeah, then again, you might say, well, a popular revolution is any time you have 25% of people are really angry and want to change. That's the closest thing you get to a popular revolution, because usually, of course, only like 1% of people are really angry and want to change. So you say that.
So in one of the slides, you mentioned politicians tend to cater to elites, right?
And go cater to
Elites. Elites.
elites, yes.
Right. So what are the reasons why they cater to them? Is it education or affluence or?
That's a good question. So two sorts. So of course, there's the one like elites are like irons, so it's corrupt. And of course, most of these aren't getting any politicians. People left themselves. So that still could be something that. The simplest one is just what is the background of almost all politicians? How many politicians are really come from working class families? Hardly any. So overwhelming majority are highly educated out of people that get the top rung, almost all of them from the schools. Trump makes these populist working in their working every day. So if you come to the elite then, and you've got some room to maneuver, then it makes sense. Well, I can do what I want, right? Well, I'm an elite, right? So let me do the elite thing. So I think that's probably another part of this. So anyway, another part maybe these actually better arguments. So politicians are understated by them. And of course, we have other stories that are really like, probably the most popular one is that the politicians are really, they're self-interested in just doing what the bodies want. Although again, if you actually take a look at what elites say, it's not at all clear that what they're doing is what elites really opinions are driven by self-interest, just like I was saying earlier. So, anyway, for example, how exactly is the benefit of rich people to tell their kids? What's in it for them? If they rich people benefit, sure. If they don't, so that doesn't really make sense. On the other hand, the idea is just part of the culture to be pro-gay or anti-gay. Thank you. get home for dinner now. But, thanks all for coming, and thanks a lot for coming out. I know that hardly anyone will do it,